sestir hjá mér Dr. Henning Meyer, hann framkvæmdastjóri ráðgjafarfyrirtækisins New Global Strategy, ritstjóri Social Europe og hefur skrifað greinar fyrir mikið af alþjóðlegum fjölmiðlum, Guardian, New York Times, Die Zeit og fleiri, og við ætlum að ræða aðeins borgarlaun. Welcome, Dr. Meyer.
Thank you.
You've written or studied universal basic income, written quite a lot about it, and you're a bit skeptical about it. You have doubts whether it is the answer to, most likely what we would call the fourth industrial revolution, some technological changes that may have large-scale effects on our job market. Tell me why it is that you have some doubts about this.
Yeah, well, first of all, the general discussion about the basic income is obviously decades old, and sometimes it strikes me as a problem, a solution looking for a problem. So it resurfaced in the discussion about the digital revolution and how policy should reply to the digital revolution. And if you think it through, if we were faced with large-scale job losses as a result of technological change,
which many are predicting.
And the honest answer is we don't know how many jobs will disappear. Yeah. I mean, as with all economic modeling, it depends on what your assumptions are. Mm-hmm. But in policy terms, you have to prepare for the worst. Mm-hmm. So, but if we were losing, 47% or 50% of all jobs, would a basic income be a viable option? I think no. First of all, because at a level where it would replace wage labor, even at a minimum wage level, it is simply unaffordable. Yeah. And there's a whole variety of other issues, such as reducing the social value of work to just income and a variety of other things. So I don't think a solution for that. Yeah.
So you mean by the social value that people are not just working as a way of getting an income, it's a big part of living our lives and socializing with other people?
Yes, I mean, this is a controversial issue. I mean, it depends on how you define work. Yeah. I mean, the people who tend to be in favor of basic income see wage labor as a sort of enforced situation where people have to give up their free time in order to earn a living. By basically replacing the income part of that equation, you basically free yourself up. Yeah. I take a different view of what work is or what labor is. As you mentioned, a lot of people actually do enjoy their work. It's not just the income part of work, but they socialize with their colleagues. They spend most of them 8 hours a day during the week in the workplace. So a significant part of your life actually happens in the workplace. And if your job were to go, just replacing the income part of the equation, I think leaves you still with a huge gap.
Yeah, and it's a problem as well with how we would finance this kind of income. That would be quite hard for very many states, right?
It really depends on what level you would set a universal basic income. As I said, there was a study done by the British economist John Kay, who I think took 5 countries and tried to calculate how much it would cost to have a new BI at the minimum wage level. Yeah. And even that was effectively unaffordable. So at a smaller scale, you might think about the merit of some sort of general payments. But if you think about it in the context of the digital revolution, with the threat being the potential of digital unemployment, of technological unemployment, it cannot be a solution if it can't even replace jobs at the level of a minimum wage. Okay.
Many have and that has been sort of the discussion here in Iceland, have seen this as a part of solving a problem with inequality. This would help those who are financially having a hard time. Do you see it as a solution to inequality problems?
Again, against the backdrop of the digital revolution, I see it would probably entrench inequality.
Yeah. How so?
The digital revolution basically has 2 ways of impacting inequality. The first one is via the labor market. So if we were to see large-scale job losses, we would have a further polarization of the labor market. Yeah. So obviously that would tend to increase inequality.
Yeah. Those who own all the technical solutions that are replacing the labor market, and then those who will lose their jobs.
Yeah, exactly. The first one is those who lose the jobs, and if they were to fall down on some level of universal basic income, by any conceivable measure, it would have to be less than they earned previously in their job. So they would lose. We had a further polarization as a result of the impacts on the labor market, and that would tend to increase inequality. And the second aspect is, as you just mentioned, one of the features of the digital economy seems to be that there is a further concentration of capital ownership, where a few really big companies take away all the spoils, basically, and that is coming also out of the inequality research that Branko Milanovic and others have been doing, and Thomas Piketty, that the digital economy tends to increase that kind of primary distribution, and the basic income wouldn't do anything to change that either. No. So in that sense, I don't see it as a solution to the inequality problem that might be exacerbated by the digital revolution.
Right. What else could work to face the possible and probable, at least some effects of the digital revolution?
Yeah, I came up with a few steps. I mean, none of this is rocket science, and all of this has been there before. I mean, the first one is obviously education will have a completely different meaning. Again, that is one of my criticisms against the basic income. Even if you were voluntarily to choose to exit the labor market for, say, 2 years or 3 years and to live on a basic income, you would have probably scarring effects, what we call scarring effects. Basically, as the job profiles need more and more education quicker and quicker, the longer you're out of the labor market, the less likely you are to re-enter.
Yeah, you need some skills.
You need some skills, and you need to keep updating these skills constantly. So the longer you are out of the labor market, the harder it will be for you to re-enter. So that might also be the wrong incentive set by a scheme like the universal basic income. But education, continuous education is the first thing. Then the second point is probably you'd have to think about the reallocation of the remaining work. Yeah. So if the productivity increases as such that a lot of work disappears, you might be able to rethink the working hours per week. So you have a different balance between work and leisure time. So that's the second step. But at the end of the day, you really have to think about the primary distribution that I mentioned, and that's coming out of the inequality research. And I think we need to think about democratizing capital ownership more.
What does that entail?
That could be capital ownership on 2 levels. First of all, what the Harvard economist Richard Friedman called the workers' share. Okay. So if you have 100% income from wage labor, but if you get shares from the companies, you own more of your companies, so you get actually capital returns as well. Yeah. So you diversify more with this ownership. So you basically workers have an equity stake in their companies as well. So
this is giving the workers shares in their own companies.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So it's basically the allocation is if the capital ownership, the Piketty distribution, if this is correct, it basically means capital accumulates more quickly than work. Well, there's only so much you can do by the tax system. Yeah. You will basically have to change the way the primary distribution works. And if you change the primary distribution, you can re-socialize some of these capital returns. That can be either done, as I said, on the individual level, where workers themselves own shares in their own company, but it can also be done on a national level, for instance, via special purpose vehicles such as sovereign wealth funds, where governments can have holdings of equities, and basically these capital returns are coming back into public ownership and could then be reinvested in something else. And as opposed to giving people just a basic income, I think that some of these returns could be used to fund a job guarantee scheme.
Okay, how would that work?
The basic principle is that if these jobs were to disappear as a result of the digital revolution, it's because the economic utility is no longer there, or it can be automated. But as human beings, we will never tire of being able to think of social utility of activities. Yeah. So not jobs in a traditional sense, where because of economic utility it is being created, but we need to think about social utility or market failures. I mean, a few areas spring to mind immediately. Healthcare and care for the elderly is a completely underserved sector at the moment, and the pay is very, very low. Given demographic trends, that's an area that's going to require more human labor going forward.
So the states would pay people to switch their jobs, or those who had lost it to work in healthcare?
Yes, some of these capital returns could be used to fund activity because it's not a job in a traditional sense because it's created because of supply and demand, but because it's deemed socially useful by the people. Another area, cultural areas. I mean, a German political scientist once said there's never been a symphony orchestra that is economically viable. They're all subsidized, but the cultural value is beyond doubt. So you can even think about giving local communities the ability to decide what kind of social activity they would like to support. Imagine you are in a local municipality and you have 2 or 3 jobs you can decide on. The community could decide whether they want to employ football coaches for the kids, they want to have a theatre club. It's up to them what kind of thing they would do. And that would build a professional structure around volunteering as well. So if it's designed well, I think it could also be a way to revive community spirit and do something for social cohesion, because not necessarily as part of the digital revolution, but a general problem that I see across a lot of Western societies is that the social strata rarely mix anymore. And this would be a way to kind of reinforce these social spaces where people still actually meet.
I want to return just for a second to education, because you talked about the need to renew or look differently at the way we educate our children and then most likely grown-ups. What changes do you think have to be done when it comes to education in Western countries or all over the world to meet these challenges ahead?
I mean, first of all, continuous education, right? So that you have to have much better schemes where also within the corporate sector and helped by public policy, where you have really continuous education. So you're constantly skilling people up. Second is probably more focus on less tangible educational outcomes. I mean, there was a great article in Financial Times, I think 2 years ago, that a liberal arts education in this day and age is probably more valuable than a technical skill, because the technical skill you learn today might be completely obsolete in 2 or 3 years' time because technology has changed. So the core ability for analytical thinking, constant learning, social skills, problem solving, these kind of key skills, I think the focus should be much more on those skills because they are transferable and they give you a more solid foundation for lifelong learning.
We don't have very much time left. I want to check with just in the end, how well prepared do you think countries are for this probable and possible changes that are ahead and might happen very, very fast?
I mean, I think the policy discussion is slowly starting in many places. I mean, some countries have had it for a few years. Some others are starting now. I mean, in Germany, where I'm from, there was the Labour Ministry in the last government had a process that they called Work 4.0, which was basically trying to spell out what it would mean in Germany. I think it's just important to raise awareness that this might be around the corner, and advisedly say might, because really nobody knows whether it will happen or not. But in policy terms, you have to be prepared. So I think it would be important for policymaker and society at large to start discussing this and thinking it through, because every economy is structured differently, and therefore you would also have to have a tailor-made approach in order to have a public policy response to this.
And you're here to talk to the labor unions. I mean, you must, it sort of looks obvious that you have to have sort of a flexible labor market that is prepared for this just as well as the States.
Well, it depends on what you mean by flexibility. I mean...
well, you talked about shorter hours, most likely then for the same wage. This has to be sort of part of the equation when you're having discussions about labor.
Flexibility, it depends on how you construct it. I mean, flexibility can also lose skills very quickly. I mean, if you look at the economic crisis, for instance, and the policy response in Germany and elsewhere. In Germany, there was an agreement with the unions to reduce the working hours, but keep staff employed. Because they were not sacked as in other countries, so they did not lose their skills, but they were kept in skills. And the economy as such was very quick to recover as a result of this, because by the time the economy picked up, production could be ramped up very quickly, because there was no need to rehire people that you laid off otherwise and might not longer be available. So you see that effect very well in the German statistic, and it's been, I think, rightly celebrated in Germany as a very good public policy. Germany had a very deep hit after 29 as a very export-reliant country, but recovered very quickly. And a huge part of that was actually retaining that skill. Some people might interpret that as a less flexible labor market because you didn't dismiss these people at the time, but it turned out to be strength, right? So if you have flexibility built in the sense that you have a flexible policy response to when things happen. But if flexibility just means being able to hire and fire people very quickly, that doesn't make economic sense, I think, and it also doesn't make much public policy sense because obviously people don't like losing their jobs and there will be political repercussions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Meyer. Við komumst ekki lengra að sinni, segjum þetta gott í bili. Við erum hérna vikuliðinni, verið sæl.